So, a listener to my channel had this comment and question. He said, I have been interested in Buddhism for a long time. I have been focusing on Honen and Shinran from Pure Land Buddhism, also focusing on Bodhidharma and Dogen from the Chan Zen school. I have a question regarding Pure Land. Would you regard it as being more metaphysical compared to the Zen school? He also refers to being oriented toward the newer teachings of Plato, which I can't really comment on because I don't know anything about it, but he is clearly knowledgeable about philosophy. So I told him, I said, Sir, you are much more learned than I in the area of philosophy. If metaphysical refers to, quote, an idea, doctrine, or positive reality outside of human sense perception, close quote, such that it is, quote, concerned with explaining the features of reality that exist beyond the physical world and our immediate senses, close quote, I would say that at least at a superficial level, the answer is yes. Pure Land is more metaphysical than Zen. As I understand it, Chan or Zen is very much focused on the here and now experience of suchness, as reflected in an acute awareness of one's immediate senses. Pure Land, on the other hand, posits a vast universe filled with cosmic Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the most prominent of whom is Amitabha Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, who made a primal vow to save any beings that entrust in the power of his vow to cause his or her rebirth in the Pure Land at the time of his or her death. Now, all that said, both traditions emerged as schools within Mahayana Buddhism, which I suppose one could say is itself metaphysical in its underpinnings. In this broader tradition, the idea that any entity or living being has a separate and independent existence is an illusion, that the nature of fundamental reality is non-dual and cannot be comprehensively or adequately expressed in any terms used by language or thought. Thus, any belief system whatsoever is merely like a finger pointing at the moon, not the moon itself. All philosophical or religious teachings are, as is clearly implied in the second chapter of the Lotus Sutra, expedient means used to draw people toward this deeper insight. I hope these few comments help just a bit in responding to your question. Well, that leads me to come back over and over again, and maybe I'm like a broken record in talking about expedient means or skillful means, that all of the various 84,000 teachings in Buddhism, as it's said there are, and all of the religious traditions in the world, the ones that are positive in the sense that they lead to greater harmony among human beings, they are all tactful methods that allow human beings to perhaps get a glimpse of something beyond the scope of what we are oriented to knowing and experiencing through our various senses. Again, I'm not enough of a philosopher to really sort of have a solid grounding and understanding of the term metaphysical. That's why I put it in quotes, because I looked it up in order to respond to this query. But, on the one hand, our concrete here and now experience through our senses is the most real thing that we can fathom, and that's referred to, I think, in Buddhism as suchness, this actual momentary experience right now. But on the other hand, do we have the whole picture? Do we really understand the scope of the circumstances that we're in? And I'm not just talking about even on this earth, but in this universe. Or are there multiverses? I mean, we just don't know. There's so much. And our whole sensory apparatus, including our brain, which is what interprets these senses that come in to our sort of intracranial neurons and create a sense of the reality that we consider to be fundamentally true, that these things don't necessarily tell us the whole picture of who we are and what circumstances we're in terms of the larger universe of the stars and planets and various kinds of black holes and dark matter and whatnot that exist within the cosmos. So, it's arrogant really to think that we have the whole picture, and yet at the same time, because we have awareness, because we have self-awareness, because we view ourselves as a separate being, because we have anxieties about our ultimate destiny, which is basically the same for all of us, and we know what that is, that maybe that's the purpose that we have spiritual traditions and religions, and that those can give us comfort, but that different ones of us need different approaches in order to find a niche, if you will, as to having an understanding as to where we fit into this whole thing that not only gives us comfort, but also that leads us to a more harmonious interpersonal existence with our fellow beings. We often don't do very good at that, and we have a lot to learn as a species. And I'm afraid that, as I've often thought and said to my friends, that our technical savvy and advancements far exceed the speed of our biological evolution and changes. But all we can do is work with what we have and try to understand reality as best we can. And to the extent that we think that we have an approach that makes sense and that has this criterion of harmoniousness rather than conflict and warfare, that we can share this with others. And to my mind, the Buddhadharma is a good example of this in most of its applications. Again, that's not to say there aren't some forms of Buddhism, or some Buddhists, I should say, who don't sort of manifest that kind of ideal, just as there are in all religious traditions, some elements that are more negative in the implications of their belief systems insofar as its impact on other human beings. But nevertheless, again, I can only speak for the Buddhist perspective, which is my own way of thinking of the world and of myself, my place in the world, which is basically one of great humility. As Shinran said, I am an ignorant, ordinary being filled with blind passions, but have an orientation of gratitude toward Amida Buddha, who represents that force in the universe, who provides me with comfort and assurance that I'll be reborn in a pure land when I die. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.